Good morning, everybody. This is Walk the Dog with Riot Mort, and it is Friday. Hooray, Friday. It's about 6:30. I woke up a little later than normal, but that's okay. Needed a little extra sleep. Not a big deal. Today's going to be a relatively quiet day for me until the afternoon, at which point I have meetings and interviews and stuff like that. We're finally starting some of the interviews for those game design positions. Now keep in mind, just by me saying that doesn't mean like if you haven't heard that you didn't get it or something like that. That is not what that means. It just means as we're going through them, the ones who are getting to the interview phase are getting interviewed, and then we keep going through them. So don't let it necessarily discourage you. As far as I know, people will hear back either way, so don't stress out about it too much. Other than that, what I'll say is life is never simple. Life is never predictable, but we'll talk about that in the future. For now, though, like I said, it's the weekend. It's going to be a great weekend. Pre-release, wife time, and the movie and stream. So yeah, it's going to be a good weekend. Okay, before I get into today's questions, there was a question that was asked literally like an hour ago. I tried to answer it through text, but then I realized I should just talk about this just so that there's no confusion. And the question was about how mono-regen, mono-banking, and mono-lock all work together. And so I figured I can just explain this real quick so that it's very, very simple. Okay? Let's say you have a character that has a 60 mana cost, and they're just a marksman to keep it simple. And you've thrown on 3 Shojins and somehow have 30 mana regen. Okay? So what happens is you do your first auto attack, you gain 25 mana. Mana regen kicks in, you gain 30 mana, you're now at 55. Okay? Now, your next auto attack would give you 25 mana, but you only need 5 to cast your spell. Okay? So this is where mana banking kicks in. At that exact moment that triggers, 5 of the mana goes towards needing to cast, and the other 20 is banked. Okay? So basically what that means is anytime a source that gives you mana would go over what you need to cast, you bank it. Okay? Now, let's say that exact same scenario, 55 mana, and then it was the mana regen that ticked, not the auto attack. Okay? So mana regen ticks, I would gain 30, 5 of it goes towards casting, the other 25 would get banked. Okay? So both mana regen and other things can contribute to banking. Banking is what happens if any source triggers a cast, but your mana goes over what you needed. Okay? Now, the instant you hit that max cap, you begin casting your spell. So I've hit 60 mana, 20 of it is banked, or 20 mana is banked, and now I start to cast my spell. Okay? During my spell casting state, you enter monolock. Okay? During monolock, nothing can give you mana. Nothing. Not damage taken, not mana regen, and if you somehow were able to auto attack during monolock, you cannot gain mana. So nothing gives you mana. The most common example of this is like during my spell cast for the first 1 second. Usually monolocks are about 1 to 1.25 seconds. Maybe some longer channel spells like Seraphine might be a little longer. But that is how monolock works. Now, there's one other case of monolock that's pretty common, which is if I'm a tank who self-shields. Okay? So if I'm a tank who says, shield myself for 1,000, I'm usually monolocked during that state. And monolock is there to prevent infinite cases, right? If you weren't monolocked, it would be possible to create a tank that would generate enough mana to cast the shield again before the first shield expired, creating an unkillable beast. And so Mana Lock was originally introduced to make sure we didn't essentially have infinite casts. And again, I will state that nothing can give you mana during that Mana Lock state, not Mana Regen. So, the question was like, well, is Mana Zane banking or is Mana Regen bank? No, nothing banks. Bank only happens at the trigger before you gain enough mana. And then during Mana Lock, nothing gives you mana. And then after Mana Lock, you can go back to gaining mana and you get the part of the bank. So let's take Mana Zane as the example here. I'm at 55 out of 60. Actually, no, so same example, but my third item. So we have the 3 Shojins, the 30 Mana Regen, and somehow I have Mana Zane also, okay? So I now am at 60 with 20 banked. Mana Zane triggers. I am Mana Locked for 1 second. And so during that first 1 second of Mana Lock, I don't gain the 30 mana from Mana Regen. I don't gain any of Mana Zane's mana. And then the Mana Lock ends. I'm now at 20 out of 60. And then Mana Zane and Mana Regen can tick in. And so that's how it functions. So again, banking only happens at the instant that you hit the cap. Mana Lock means you cannot gain mana no matter what. And so your question might be, hey, does that mean if I'm somebody who has a longer Mana Lock that Mana Zane is worse? Yes, right? Like set 14 Misfortune with her long channel time. Is Mana Zane worse on her? Yes, because she could be wasting some of that Mana Zane mana during her Mana Lock while she's casting her spell. So there you go. That's how that system works. It's all very rules lawyeried, but pretty happy. And that's the mark of a good game design system, by the way. If you can explain it clearly and know exactly how all the interactions work, that's a good system. Now, is it the most intuitive system? Maybe not necessarily. Is it elegant? Not really. Would it be clearer if you could just gain mana all the time? Probably. But that introduces negative game states that we can't allow. So that's kind of how it works. Okay, so now I can answer the actual questions I prepared. I already wasted 7 minutes. No, I'm not wasting, but okay. Someone asked an interesting question here. Unique champion power-ups, right? So this is stuff like, I'll use Jin's, for example. I don't know if Jin's is actually unique, but there's one that Jin can get that's like, your 4th shot now can overkill and bounce to new targets, okay? And the question is, why can they be power-ups, but they can't be hero augments, You've always said that you wouldn't do hero augments on carries because carries, they become necessary with them. And so why can't they be hero augments, but why can they be power-ups? And I can see the logic here. I can see why you're asking that. But the general rule here is that if you look at a standard game of TFT, right? Just a normal, let's say we're making set 1 again with augments for the sake of this. A standard game of TFT, you pick your carry, you build around your carry, and augments enhance you to get to that state. So many cars, Jesus. Sorry. It's hard to talk when people are eyeing you while you're walking. Okay, sorry. So let's say you're playing a normal game of TFT and you have the carry, and augments are a way to essentially change that output, right? So it's like augments can give you gold, or augments can give you combat power, stuff like that. We have found that if a champion has to be playable, so let's say this Jin effect was a hero augment, that if it was only playable with that mutation, then the trade-off is never worth it, or it's too sharp. Meaning, if the only way you can play Jin is to see this hero augment, and without it, because think of it like you're building a sniper wraith comp, and you're like, what's the best augment I could get? Well, you'd hope there'd be a bunch of different augments that would be good choices, right? You're like, oh man, I sure hope I get raining gold so I can reroll, or too much value so I can reroll my Jin, or jeweled lotus so my Jin could crit, or whatever, or the Deathblade stacking one, because that one's good, right? You want there to be a lot of good options. But if something is so sharp on one specific champion, that becomes too much of the choice, and you have to balance around that. Now, the difference with power-ups is that power-ups are essentially a separate mechanical layer that allow you to budget that out, right? And so our rough framework, and trust me, I know there's exceptions to this. That's a whole other discussion. But our rough framework is that a power-up says, hey, 2 of the champions on your board, we're going to give you a plus 30% modifier. How you tend to use that 30% modifier is in and of itself a different choice, separate from the other choices. And so in that regard, we can open up the design space now of, okay, well, if every carry can have one, great, makes sense, because the choice is relative to all of those outputs. But if it's in the augment system, the choice becomes, do I want plus 30% output or raining gold? That's a lot harder to quantify. And if you feel like you always have to take the plus 30% output, then the augment choices become much more limited, which narrows design space. Now, that was a little buzzwordy of an explanation. And the reason it ends up being a little buzzwordy is because the reality is, could you justify bringing back carry hero augments? Sure, you could, right? It's not so far off the design failure that there's just no way you could make them work. That's not where it's at. But it is my belief that if you have them, it narrows the possibilities of the augment system, right? And the identity of the augment system gets warped, right? The augment system is generic modifiers to your team, whereas power-ups are much more specific things. And having a system that gives you both narrow and generic can be difficult for players to quantify and difficult for them to understand the balance. Now you might be going, well, then why are tank hero augments allowed? And the logic there, maybe it's not a good logic, but the logic here is that much like something like 9 lives or birthday present, is that a tank hero augment transforms your game into a completely different style of game, which is good for the augment system. It says, I am making a choice to play a certain type of game today. Whereas a carry hero augment doesn't do that. A carry hero augment says, I'm going to play a normal game and just have all the power funneled into one character. So, but again, everything I'm saying is very subjective. There are definitely arguments that should tank hero augments even be allowed in the system? I could see why you'd say no, right? Or should carry hero augments be allowed in the system? I could see why you'd say yes. So, and that's the thing with game design, is it's not always a very clearly defined rule set, and sometimes you can create novelty and excitement by breaking the defined rules, right? Like if every augment was a generic power-up, then they all feel the same. Whereas if all of a sudden there's a couple hero augments, ooh, that's kind of exciting, But what's hilarious enough is if you break the rule too much, then it becomes a rule itself, which means it's predictable, which means you've lost the novelty. So, and again, that's a whole other discussion. But yeah, there you go. TLDR here is that We like the augment system to be its own decision-making axes, whereas the power-up system is defined as a modifier of 2 champions. And so we can design around that space specifically, creating unique outputs there. And that's healthier than having to choose between that power-up and an augment. So there you go. All right. Oh, this one. Actually, I'm gonna do this one really quick. Somebody asked the question. I don't want to answer this one because it's silly, but it has 20 upvotes or whatever. If Rammus and Malz swapped bodies, would you still love and hate them the same? And the answer is no, I wouldn't. Because the thing I like about Malz is not his shape and thematics, it's his mechanic. I like the dot mage. And so if Malzahar and Rammus swap bodies, there'd be an armadillo who's a dot mage, which would actually be kind of cool. And then the other guy would just be a floating purple Arabian Knight kind of weird dude, which I think would also be kind of lame. Hilariously enough, I actually think base skin Malzahar is kind of lame. I really like the arcade one or the other ones where his face is just like a dark void with 2 glowy eyes. Those are my favorite Malzahar skins, where he just comes off as this like evil wizard. So I think if they swap bodies and Malzahar lost those abilities, I'd think he's really lame. And I would be okay playing Dot Mage Rammus. So there you go. Okay, the actual question here was, I mentioned before that I'm a little naive and I always give people the benefit of the doubt. And so the person was asking, how has that worked out for you? Is that a good approach to life? And so here's the honest answer. 90 to 95% of the time, yeah, it works out great. Okay. By giving people the benefit of the doubt, you can have more positive interactions much quicker. You will generally be happier in life. You will generally be, based on any given situation, you're not worrying about the negative outcomes. You are assuming things are going to go well. And then you can respond when they don't, right? So here's a really stupid, silly example. I went to one of the local card shops around here, and I went in with the assumption of, hey, local card shop owners are usually very nice and friendly and just trying to make a business. And that was my initial, impression. So I went in happy. I'm like, hey, how's it going? Starting off with a nice friendly demeanor. And I was like, hey, do you have any Final Fantasy collector boxes? How much would you sell them for? Thinking we strike a deal. And basically the guy was like, I just look up the price online and sell it for that. That's exactly what I do. I will not negotiate this. Even $10 cheaper, I could just sell it online. So you pay what you pay online or don't. Okay, cool, right? Now all of a sudden my trust goes, it's like now I know that okay, that's all this guy's in for. I have new information. I can respond accordingly. But it didn't necessarily make me pessimistic about it. It doesn't change that now I think all card shop owners are like this guy. I just think this guy is like this guy, And so I think that just makes you generally go through life in a more positive way. And I still look at that interaction and I'm just sort of like, that's how most interactions should go, right? It's default to trust. And then when trust is broken, put your guard up, right? And so in this case, my guard up being, I'm never going to go to that shop again because there are other shops around the area that are friendly. And I don't need to go to that one. No big deal. But I find, especially with the internet and things like that, there are so many people nowadays that default to distrust or assume everyone's out to get them. And they spend a lot of their time worrying about those negative possibilities and instead accomplish nothing because all they're doing is worrying about things that could go wrong. Now, again, has this bitten me in the past? Yeah, sure, right? Hell, the The China win trade thing is a pretty good instance of me being bit, right? Where it's like, I assumed the best in a person. I assumed things went well. And nope, turns out I look like an idiot. But again, does that mean my entire life viewpoint is incorrect? No. It just means I need to change my information. And so the change I went from there is like, you know what? More your default trust of competitive players, not competitive TFT players, but just competitive human beings in general, is incorrect. And you need to start assuming that competitive players are always looking for an angle to win no matter what. Right? And that is the thing that you need to adjust. But again, that doesn't mean now all of a sudden everyone is evil in the planet. No. You know? And so again, there's a lot of things that can happen that's really good when you keep a positive outlook. For example, is it weird that the lead designer of Wizards is like, hey, let's get together at your house, right? If I assume negative intent, I go, ooh, that's weird, and try to not schedule it. But instead, I go in with very positive intent. It's like, cool, dude wants to play Magic and TFT. Let's hang out. Let's do it. And you end up with a really cool experience because you're open to the possibility that everything's good. So, yeah, it's generally worked out for me, and that positivity and that drive to make things happen generally has worked out in my favor. So I don't regret that at all. Like I said, it's not flawless, but I think it generally just leads to a happier life when you're looking at things with the glass half full. If it's glass half full or glass half empty, I feel like the glass half empty people are generally much more miserable in life. And we only have one life. We only have a limited amount of time on this earth. And I'd rather spend it happy and doing awesome things than being sad and upset and worrying about people that aren't worth thinking about. So there you go. All right, next question. What does an ideal set mechanic do nowadays? So this is a good question. And I think our perception of that has changed over time, right? We used to think that the set mechanic had to carry the set. It was like, without a good set mechanic, a set is doomed. And a set mechanic needs to be something so impactful and so huge that you constantly think about it, constantly play around it, and might be so impactful that it's a permanent part of the game, right? Which is why I think a lot of our early set mechanics did end up being like permanent parts of the game in some way, right? Like galaxies essentially became portals, essentially became opening encounters, which are now currently part of the game. Augments, clearly, things like that. But now that we have so much in TFT, and this is something our game director, Peter Whalen, has been pretty adamant about as well, we have a lot of stuff in our game now. We have a lot of mechanics and things like that. So there isn't really a mechanical burden to be lifted anymore. And adding even more to that is a little much. So instead, a set mechanic should just be a memorable, thematic little mutator that we plan to go away at the end of a set. And is just something that makes you go, that was a cool set. Or yeah, that was the set that had that one thing. But honestly, it wasn't that impactful or that major. Now, you might be hearing that explanation and going, bro, power-ups seem pretty impactful. Yeah, it's true. And I would argue that like power-ups are actually on the extreme end of what an impactful mechanic should do nowadays. But the question wasn't, what is our current set mechanics? The question is, what is an ideal set mechanic? Are power-ups ideal? No. I think they're a little too impactful for what we generally want a set mechanic to be nowadays. But, you know, that's not a big deal. You can have things that are more or less impactful. And I think power-ups are fun. I think they add a lot of depth, which is good. But they are really impactful. So, again, the ideal set mechanic, I think anomalies are actually closer to the ideal set mechanic, right? It's like you're still playing core TFT, but there's this one moment that changes a little bit, and you can have different interactions based on that one moment, right? Like anomalies felt like the right version of a set mechanic in terms of volume, in terms of impact, and things like that. Now, in terms of mechanical output, I have to be vague here because obviously I know some of our upcoming set mechanics and I don't want to like allude to any of them or anything like that. But I think that's one of the interesting things is that there's a lot of design space within the core game that you can take any part of the core game, plus one it, and go, ooh, that's a cool place for a set mechanic. This is the set where we plus one to this part of the game. This is the set where we plus one to this part of the game, right? And you abstract it down to its mechanical version, which hilariously enough is a lot of what my job seems to be nowadays, is that a lot of people who design games think of everything from the thematic level first, and Riot doesn't have a ton of people who think about it from the purely mechanical standpoint. And so that seems to be what I get to help with, is making sure that our mechanics and things and other projects and whatever, that the mechanics are nice and solid. And so, yeah. So TLDR here, ideal set mechanic, something light, something that plus one's a part of the existing game, is not permanent to TFT, but gives you a small delighter and makes you remember the set and ties well, both mechanically and thematically, to the set. So, is that a little vague? Yeah. Does it have to be because I know of upcoming set mechanics? Yeah. Sorry. So, there you go. All right. I'm actually going to get through every question today. I did that one, did that one, did that one. Okay. Last question. Tocker's Trials has become a bit of the tutorial of TFT. What does it teach? Does the Cassante round teach despair? And would you ever consider giving a target dummy that just tests DPS? So, I want to be clear, I have not even looked at set 15 Tocker's Trials. So, everything I'm about to say does not include set 15 Tocker's Trials. In fact, what I will say is that mostly the first and second iterations of Tocker's Trials are what I spent most of my time on. And then from there, I've sort of been like, all right, team, you can do it. You know what Tocker's Trials is. I shouldn't need to babysit this, That being said, as someone who was very key in the first iteration of Tocker's Trials and kind of drove the vision for what it is, Tocker's Trials, hilariously enough, is a Mario vs. Donkey Kong game. And what I mean by that is that Tocker's Trials was approached with the mindset of, I've talked about like the 35-year-old mom test before or anything like that. It is meant to be the kind of thing that anyone can play and enjoy. So for example, when we had the first version of Tocker's Trials, and I was showing Phil and Whitty how to get the tuning right, I went in, I played like, I don't think you can imagine how bad you have to play to simulate this. This is like, all right, I put 3 champions on the board with no items, and I put them all in the front line. What happens, right? Like, it should be basically almost impossible to lose the first few rounds, And then that way players are just kind of like, oh, I get it. I place units and they fight. That's all you're trying to teach. You're not trying to teach them losing. You're not like, if somebody loses Tocker Trials on like 1-4, what are we doing? What are we doing? Why are we hitting them with a hammer? That is just incorrect. In fact, I think the goal I used was like, even if you play like an absolute just like terrible, terrible person, short of open forting, right? Like if you're going to open fort, go ahead and lose. But if you're going to play the units on the board, you should basically be able to get to the first boss without dying. And the first boss should be when it's like, no. You kind of actually have to like at least place some items, at least use your resources. And so like we had this gauge where it was like, hey, if you get to stage 15, 2-5, without like really playing at all, that's a good mark, right? It's like you got pretty far, you got to experience a lot of the game, but then you were like, clearly there's stuff I could do better, right? And if you play like an actual like silver player, hell, you should just be able to beat it pretty quick. Like, difficulty was not the thing we were trying to show off. We're just trying to really teach the mechanics of how it works, right? Like, this is a game where you place units and upon subsequent replays, show that you can get better, show that there's depth, right? It's like, oh, the first time I played it, I put Caitlyn in the front line. But later I learned that actually if I put stronger units in the back line, I can stay alive longer. Or, oh, items get placed. That makes me stronger. And so, the person asking this question, by the way, is Leduc, who is very familiar with the game. And this is a skill that a lot of people who are super engaged don't have. But it's like the ability to actually think like a brand new player is something that they taught us at Nintendo pretty well. And that's what Tockers is supposed to be for. It's legitimately brand new players. How should they experience it, right? People were not supposed to play Tockers Trials 5, 10, 20 times. They can, and I have nothing against that. But you're asking, what does it teach? It teaches the absolute basics. That's it. Can we expand on that? Yeah, maybe. But it's meant to teach the basics. And so the tuning should be very kind, very easy. And generally, a brand new player should beat it on their third time. If a literal brand new player does not beat on the third time, it's probably too hard. So yeah. And as far as the target dummy thing goes, if it made sense in a Tockers trial scenario, sure. Is this getting a little too close to a training, to a training mode? Maybe. But it would need to make sense. So we'd also have to set it up to be a challenge. But if you told me the challenge is I don't know, it might invalidate certain comps. Like if there was a challenge that was a target dummy that was do 1,000 DPS, otherwise you lose. It's like, well, now all of a sudden my Vanguard comp doesn't work or something like that, So I guess generally my expectation would be no, but yeah. All right, there you go. I got through a lot today. Hopefully this was a meaty one for you. I'll be on stream tomorrow, but my stream will start a little late because I'm at the pre-release. The pre-release ends at 10 and I have to get home. So I will sleep, which means I'm probably going to get up at 6, which means stream will start a couple hours late. But I will stream. So it'll be fun. And then Sunday I'll also stream. So we'll have 2 days of PvE streams. Should be fun. You can check out the set, see how it feels as the team prepares for their A patch. So there you go. Otherwise, have a great weekend. Hope you guys have fun. I know I'm going to. And there you go. All right, that's going to do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.